Fantastic. All right, so we're gonna get rolling here. My name is Adam Cook, Cook Insurance Group. I'm blessed to be the host of this room. Commercial insurance is our world. We're gonna get right on into our presenter right now. So I'm just gonna read verbatim here if you don't mind. So Josh Redelman, trusted advisor to businesses both large and small with significant experience litigating cases involving non-competition and non-solicitation agreements, as well as discrimination, not criminalization, discrimination and retaliation claims brought under the Americans with Disability Acts, Title VII of the Civic Rights Acts, Age Discrimination and Employment Act, and the Family Medical Leave Act. Josh also provides advice regarding the Fair Labor Standards Act's compliance and assists his clients with rolling out company-wide compensation changes. Conducting it's a bunch of words, conducting internal audits and investigations, reviewing, drafting, rolling out employment agreements, arbitration, classes, waivers, and that's a lot of words.
Yeah, I'm an important man.
You are, I love it, I love it. And leading settlement negotiations in recognition of Josh's work. Tom's Rooter, I can't say it, Reuters, Texas Super Lawyers recognition recognize Josh as a rising star in the area of labor and employment law in 2019. And his Houstonian magazine recognized Josh as a top lawyer in labor and employment defense in 2019 and 20. Josh's credentials also include an internship with the Honorable Marcia A. Crone, United States District Judge for Eastern District of Texas. That's Josh.
Yeah.
Good to see you, my friend.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Josh.
Yay. I'll use that. Cool. Can you all hear me? You know right now. Okay. So thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm really happy to speak with you all today. As they were saying, my name is Josh. I am a labor and employment attorney at Stibbs & Co. We're located here in Woodlands. Our motto is to help businesses succeed, and help me struggle saying our motto. So the title of my presentation today is Generation Zoom, Risk Mitigation in the Workplace. And I think it's really important for employers to understand who their employees are and what makes them tick. As we're seeing now with the COVID-19 pandemic, we've changed the way we're working. A lot of things are online. We're calling the Great Resignation. We've seen that over the last year and a half. So how do employers stop employees from leaving? And so part of that is what we're going to talk about today. We're also going to talk about the case of where the employees do leave. But I think first we need to talk about the understanding, and let's understand who we're working with and who makes up our workforce right now. So we've got Gen X, the millennials, and the newbies on the street are Gen Z. Gen X is 1965 to 1980. Millennials are 1981 to 1996. And I know a lot of people that were born in 1981 object to the term that they were a millennial, but it is in fact true, you are a millennial. And Gen Z are the folks that were born at the beginning of the internet age, when they were 1, 2, 3 years old. They still had dial-up internet, and the EU sound that the dial-up internet made, but going into 2012. So that is the next step in the workforce that we're seeing. And we need to understand, in order to retain that talent and bring that talent in, we kind of need to understand the experiences that they have gone through in their life and how that shapes the workforce, because it's really important. So we're in a multi-generational workforce right now. The largest sector are your millennials, and those are going to be your lower and mid-level managers right now. Your Gen X, which are going to be your more so your mid to higher level managers, and then you still have a large population of baby boomers. I think 25% is the calculation there. Surprisingly, when we were putting together this research, 2% of traditionalists, which end in 1945, are still in the workforce. That would make them 76 years old today. I think part of this has to do with the 2 financial crises that we've experienced in the last 2 decades. With 2008, those are prime earning years. When you're in your 50s to 60s, those are your prime earning years. So whenever your 401k gets crushed or your investment property, you have to make up for it somehow. So right now there are 5 generations in the U.S. workforce. It is the most diverse workforce that we've ever had in our country. There's the traditionalist, which ends in 1945, baby boomers, which pick up in 46. Generation X, which again is 1961, millennials 1981, beginning in Generation Z, which is now 5% of the workforce. Those are the kids that are just now graduating college and entering the workforce. And we need to understand, really, that's what we're going to be focused on today, is what makes those folks tick, what do they like, what are their workplace habits, and how do we protect the business whenever in light of those habits. So characteristics of the millennials. Well, as I was saying earlier, we need to understand who in the what events or what major events did they see, and how does that shape their work. Well, Columbine, 9/11, and the internet. Those are the three kind of big things: school shootings, terrorist attack, and the internet. I mean, this just kind of defines the millennial generation and what they're motivated by, and the ideas. So they're motivated by responsibility. They want to feel like they're part of something, and they want to be challenged. A lot of people say millennials are lazy or they're entitled. Well, both of those things are true, but there's reasons for that. It's not so much as laziness as they get bored. It's not so much as entitlement as wanting to be recognized and add value to an organization. And Gen Z also does the same thing. They were shaped by the Great Recession, technology from a young age. They've always had some sort of smartphone since they're at age 10. Twitter, all of your social media, TikTok, all of that stuff. It's the most diverse generation in the history of the country. They're very creative, and they value independence, and that is something that. Oh, you're fine. So Gen Z also values independence and individuality, and you can see that as they're a very creative generation. You see that on social media all the time, whether it's TikTok. A lot of really good marketers, you see social media stars come out of Gen Z. Really interesting way that they present information, and it can help your business succeed in the way that you reach out to the next generation in the marketing. So again, getting back to what do millennials and Gen Z want in their workplace? Well, Gen Z is more motivated by money and job security. Getting back to how you retain talent and attract talent and their experience they've been through. Gen Z experienced the financial crisis. They saw their parents get fired, lose their jobs, struggle to find new jobs. And the same thing with millennials, except with the millennial generation, is they were coming out of school during the financial crisis. So they view, an interesting thing about this, and when we're doing the research, is millennials view their career as the most important thing in their life. And that makes sense, right? Because they're graduating in 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. They're graduating from they're getting their graduate degrees, they're getting their undergraduate degrees, and their whole lives, they've been told they're going to get a job, and it's going to be a good job. All you have to do is go to college, and you will succeed. Well, they found out after the financial crisis, that's not true. That's not true. So oftentimes you go up, and I'm a millennial myself, and you go up and you start talking to a millennial. The first or second question they ask you is, what do you do for a living? So, and it's not a social hierarchical ranking. It's just a lot of millennials like myself and people in this room that work with me will attest. I put a lot of myself into my job, and that's what a lot of millennials do. They identify, part of their identity is their job. Unfortunately, I'm a lawyer, and part of my identity is lawyer, so it's not exactly a great identity, I guess. And then Gen Z, they want a healthy work-life balance, and they want, again, back to the independence. While they're motivated by money, they don't want their life to be their job. They want to live and work at the same time. So with the independence and the trust and what we're seeing in COVID-19 as the online workforce and employees, they want flexibility, right? The online workforce and being able to work from home provides that flexibility to the employee. And that's really what they're looking for. And whenever you're trying to attract that talent, they're looking for that flexibility that you provide at the outset. If you have a flexible working relationship, working arrangement where you can work 3 days in the office, 2 days at home, or vice versa. That is what this generation is really looking for. So another interesting paradigm shift that we're seeing in the workforce right now is the men and women versus in the workforce versus men and women in college. And this should really inform the policies that employers put in place. And I will tell you this, I was having a conversation with my colleague Morgan about discrimination policies in maternity leave and paternity leave. If you're an employer, please do not segregate men and women in terms of parental leave. As you'll see, there are 60% of women in college versus 40% of men. So what is that going to result in? Well, and if you look at the workforce graph or pie chart, that means there are going to be less men in the workforce, more women in the workforce, in your higher level, less blue collar industries. So your STEM type industries are going to be attracting more women. We're seeing that all of our educational institutions have been pushing that. As you can see here in the college, on the college pie chart, that is actually what it is resulting. You're seeing more women going than men going to college by quite a large margin. So what does that mean? Well, that means you're going to have to, still to this day, women bear the brunt of childbearing responsibilities. Whether that's right or wrong, I'm not going to comment on that today, but what I am going to say is, as an employer, you need to start thinking about how do we lessen the impact on women in the workforce? Because we have a lot of empty spots and a lot of empty seats in offices where we're struggling to retain and hire good talent. Well, part of that is because we have inflexible workplace policies. So we have to start thinking about policies with the perspective of who is coming out of school, what are their needs as they grow up and they go from 21 to 30 to 35 to 40, and how can we lessen the impact of what they have, the responsibilities that they have at home and the responsibilities that they have at the workplace, and how do we balance that out? So that's going to be an interesting question presented to HR, talent managers, business owners as we start moving forward in the next decade. So really, just briefly, just the most popular college majors, business #1 still. We're starting to see an uptick in engineering, sciences, but really this is just for employers, as you understand who's coming out of school, and it's important to understand kind of who's coming out of school, so how you can shift your workforce and assign responsibilities. Because business is a really good major whenever you need an overall understanding of what's going on. So the workplace trends, getting back to Gen Z, the workplace trends, because of the social media, we're skilled multitaskers. They can text, talk, and work all at the same time. Again, valuable flexibility as we start seeing more women than men entering the workforce in your white collar careers. That flexibility is going to be more and more important. Or we're also going to have, I think, a culture shift where we're seeing more men stay at home rather than the woman resign from the job, which is what we've seen basically since the Great Depression, as women started taking on more income earning roles all the way through. It's an interesting sociological and societal shift that we're seeing over the past 100 years. We also see short career tenures, and for talent management, it's important that the business beat the average. And what I mean by that is the Gen Z folks, because they are still multitaskers and because they want to be engaged in multiple challenges all the time, they're staying less and less at jobs. And we'll see that in a second. But again, Gen Zers have an 8-second attention span. This goes back to technology. You see, it goes back to reading. If you see all of the marketing and PR, and they're talking about blog posts. Right, everyone reads in an F pattern now. No one actually reads the entire thing. Previously, when everything was in paper, people would read from left to right. They would read the whole thing. They wouldn't scan it. But now, where things are online, you're starting to see people reading F patterns. They go up and down, left and right. They get the top line. They get the middle line. They get the general gist. I do it sometimes too. So whenever you're marketing, you need to be able to reach that, and your message needs to be pop. It needs to pop. And it needs to reach that in understanding 8 seconds. So going into 8 seconds, again, short career tenures. So what does this mean for the employers? Well, that means they're going to need to integrate technology into their business. They're going to need to lead with more videos, more imagery, less written text. They need to keep their messaging short to their employees. Meetings don't need to last an hour. You don't need to have a meeting about a meeting. Let's just have the meeting. And continue to engage with your employees because they want to get back to work and they want to go home. That's what Gen Z, they want to do a really good job. They would take pride in their work, but at the end of the day, they want to go home. They don't want to be at the office from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the evening. So again, back to flexibility. This is just a really, really important point. 84% of Gen Z wants a healthy work-life balance. If you can provide, and COVID-19 has moved us 10 years into the future, if you can provide a working arrangement where they can work in the morning, they can take a break, go on a walk, take a 2-hour lunch, and come back. If that's something that your workplace can do, great. Understanding that's not always the case. You know, if you're, for example, you're a doctor, you got to work your doctor hours. Again, COVID-19. There's interesting here because the statistic is 51% of employees want to work at home, but 58% of managers think that's not happening. They don't want to do that. Well, there's obviously a clash between the idea of management and what the employee is. So we're going to start seeing if the employer and the business is not providing that flexibility. Well, again, with the great resignation thing that we've seen throughout COVID-19 in January 2020 and still going on to this day, your employees are going to leave, and we don't want that to happen. Again, short career tenures, 1 to 4, 1 in 4, 25% of people want to stay for more than 5 years. And so from a talent management perspective and a cost perspective, it's always expensive to onboard people and onboard new employees. You lose institutional knowledge. So you want to, as an employer, you need to start pushing that number higher, get it higher than 25%. And HR, that will help you succeed, because if you're starting to pay out $50,000, however much it costs for you to train a new employee and bring them on and keep that institutional knowledge, you're going to want to keep that cost down as much as you can. So like I was saying, Gen Z, about 2.5 years, millennials, not much better, Gen X, 5 years, boomers, a little over 7.5 years. So Gen Z, they're determined and they want to do a really good job. Getting back to somewhat of the entitlement that is often associated with younger generations, you'll see here, 57% of people want to be promoted within a year. Yikes. So I don't know from an organizational standpoint if that's feasible for everyone, but perhaps a creative idea is to create new titles that don't mean so much, but give one what you can do is mentorship, right? If you're a new employee, you come in, you have a mentor, you're a mentee relationship, and as you continue to train up succession planning, as you continue to train up your employees, you can add those layers in and make it feel like a promotion. Obviously, not everyone can be a CEO. People are going to have to realize by the time you're going to be a mid-manager, and that's okay. Not everyone is the CEO. Not everyone has the qualities, characteristics, and personality to be the CEO. So as you structure your talent organization in your organization, that's something to consider. So now that we've kind of shifted and we've had the paradigm of people working from home, what are your considerations when you're managing these remote workers? Well, where are they working? You could be a Texas-based organization and have people in California. Do Texas laws apply? No. Your California laws apply. So you need to make sure you're paying them the break time in California. Or if they're working in Colorado, make sure you're complying with the heightened discrimination laws, anti-discrimination laws in Colorado, right? You have to understand where you're working, where your workers are working, and make sure you're following those laws. If you have a remote workforce based in the EU, you better make sure that you're you're complying with the EU's privacy policies when it comes to monitoring your workforce. And then a fourth question is, how are you going to hire and onboard? A lot of this, the one downside that I've seen in the last 2 years of, unfortunately it's been about 2 years, of this COVID-19 pandemic going into 2022 now, we see people get disconnected. And it's important to keep that team environment in place and making sure you're collaborating and you're staying engaged and you have touch points with with an employee every single week. You don't want there to be 2, 3, 4 weeks go by and then the first time they hear from a manager is like, hey, what's going on? That's not a good way to keep these people engaged. And then how are you going to train and do performance evaluations of your online workforce? So this gets back to those touch points and actually doing performance evaluations. I couldn't tell you how many times as an employment lawyer, I get a call saying, Josh, we fired Barbara. Barbara's gone. And I said, well, Jim, why'd you fire Barbara? He said, performance evaluation. Their performance was bad. I said, okay, we'll send me the performance evaluation. Well, Josh, we haven't done performance evaluations in about 3 years. Well, now how am I supposed to go and tell a jury that this person got fired for performance when you haven't done a performance evaluation in 3 years? It's not a good argument, and it puts you in a very weak position as an employer. And again, topic of this risk mitigation. Well, if you want to mitigate your risk of losing a lawsuit, and you still need to fire people for performance reasons, well, you're going to have to fire people. So let's have those maybe quarterly performance evaluation, because the Gen Z, the Gen X, the Gen Z and the millennials, they don't want a yearly performance evaluation. They want to know how they're doing. They want feedback. I was always told as a young lawyer, no news is good news, and that drove me nuts. How am I supposed to know how I'm doing as a first-year attorney if nobody tells me that I'm doing anything good or bad? I just look at the blood on the page that is the red line, right? That makes me think I'm doing a terrible job. But in reality, that's just a first-year lawyer, right? So as you're bringing these entry-level employees in, they need more and more touch points and more positive feedback or negative feedback, depending on how they're performing, so that they can learn and improve and feel like they're a valuable member of the organization. Because nothing's worse than going to work every day from 9 to 5 and you feel like a little peon. I mean, nobody wants that. Nobody wants to feel valued. So what are the risks of kind of the modern workforce? Well, one, data security. Everybody, since people are not working, you don't have a managed server in the office that can secure. So as the folks from Right Technology will probably tell you, well, we need like secure VPNs. We need to make sure you've got air gaps in your computers, that you can't print on the road, that we have monitoring software for your emails. So that's really important. We'll get into that later. And then of course you need to make sure that you've got policies in place, like restrictive covenants agreements, going back to the two and a half year tenure of Gen Z and millennials. They hop around a lot. Well, you need to protect your intellectual property. So how do you do that? And what's the best way to protect that intellectual property, the training that you've spent so many hours and so much time, effort, and energy on? How do you protect that? Well, you protect that through restrictive covenant agreements. And then, of course, the remote work policy, making sure that the remote work policy, they're timely reporting their wages and hours, and they're timely, and that you are not violating any privacy laws. And we'll get into that in a second. So your restrictive covenants agreements. Back to, I'm a litigator and I also do advice and counseling, but back to restrictive covenants agreements, there's nothing worse whenever somebody comes up to you and says, Josh, Steve left his job, he went to a competitor, and now he's starting to take all of his clients. And stop them from doing it. And they send me the restrictive covenant agreement, and it's not even close to being enforceable. So employers, for a couple of reasons. One, it's overbroad, or two, there's no consideration for it. Because Steve's been working for you for the last 10 years, and you decided, well, now I'm going to slap a non-compete on him or a non-solicitation agreement, and guess what? That's not valid consideration. There's only 2 ways in the state of Texas to have valid consideration, or really 3. Specialized training, confidential information, or for some reason, the Texas Supreme Court in 2011 said stock options. Kind of weird. But anyway, that's the kind of the status of the law as it is in Texas. So it's easier to have these enforceable agreements whenever you hire them in the first place. The only way you can really get an enforceable agreement once they're already working for you is that you somehow document that they're getting new confidential information, or you give them stock options, or you're giving them some sort of new training or access to a new category of confidential information. And so the key about the enforceability of the agreement is that it's not overbroad. So I'm not a huge fan of just non-competes. I like more of the non-solicitation. So protecting your customers, right? The Biden administration has already come out and said in an executive order that we want to stop the proliferation of unnecessary non-competes. There is no reason that, I like the name Steve, so I'm going to use that during the presentation today. There's no reason that Steve the tire shop has a non-compete. Why does Steve the tire shop have a non-compete? The non-compete really should be reserved for your managers, people that have those, that are going to be in the positions of being able to give a competitive advantage just because of who they are. Not because of any special information that they have, but just because of the position that they have with your company and what they're going to be overseeing strategically and the like. And then, of course, your non-solicits are your sales guys and the people that have touch points with your customers, because you're trying to protect your goodwill and, of course, your customer base. That's the lifeblood of your company. So really, whenever you're drafting, whenever you speak to an employment attorney, the idea is not to scare the employee, it's to have an enforceable agreement. Because the downside is whenever you try to go and enforce that agreement and the court has to reform it, well, guess what? All the damages that occurred between the time that you filed the lawsuit or the wrongdoing started and the time the court reforms the agreement, you can't get any damages. You could lose $10 million worth of business in that time frame. I don't know. It could be a massive amount of business that you would lose. There's no way to recover for it. You just stop them from doing it in the future. That's not a good position to be in for an employer and for a business owner. So remote work policies and things that you need to consider as you're moving forward and giving that flexibility for the young workers, for the millennials, for the Gen Zers, is how do you onboard? Well, thankfully, Texas has an electronic signature act that says I'm going to paraphrase it, but basically, if you have an electronic signature that is affixed to the document and you have secure protocols in place to ensure that somebody from HR, some other business, somebody within the business cannot log into that employee's employment profile, if there's ADP or whatever portal that the business uses, goes in there and there's that secure measure in place, and that's a valid signature. And it's important because with my clients, we have arbitration agreements, and that means they're not going to court. If there's a dispute between the employee and the employer or the employee and their employee, that is going to private arbitration. That is not going to spill over into court. And those allegations, hopefully, will not spill in. People do not want to have salacious allegations related to sexual harassment, related to discrimination. People don't want that in court. So arbitration provides a private, confidential way to resolve these sorts of disputes. Another thing that people need to think about is who's eligible for telecommuting. The salary and hourly workers, there's a compliance issue with the Fair Labor Standards Act. How does the employer ensure that an hourly worker is not working off the clock? It's very difficult. But in light of this, the Department of Labor has come out and said, if you have a policy in place that mandates they have to accurately report the hours, and you provided policy training on that policy, that should protect you. I'm not saying it's going to stop a lawsuit. Anybody can file a lawsuit for anything. But that is what the DOL is looking at. That is what the court's going to be looking at, is what kind of telecommuting policy, what kind of hourly reporting for your hourly employees. And the salary workers, if they work one day a week, you're going to pay the whole salary. And then the last thing is, how do you accommodate disabilities? Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, remote work really didn't exist. And now that it does, and now that kind of the cat's out of the bag here, Pandora's box has been open, if you provide remote work for your employees, and then somebody with a disability says, I need to work from home, well, you need to engage in an interactive process with them. It's not necessary that you have to give them the telecommuting option, but the EEOC is looking into it, and they're starting to look for test cases to do so, to bring against companies on whether the company engaged in the interactive process with that employee that said they were disabled, and what accommodation. You don't have to necessarily give them the telecommuting option if an in-place option is sufficient and will work. But did you go through that analysis with your employee, which is you're required to do? Lee briefly touched on whenever we were talking about in the employment panel the last hour is whenever somebody's working at home, that's their workspace, and workers' compensation applies. So workers' compensation is not going to say, I think some employers kind of get a little scared there, when they say, well, that's their workplace. How can I ensure that they don't have a bunch of Legos all over the place? They trip and fall and get hurt. Well, you can put in your policy that you expect. What I would recommend is that you define in the employee's home what the workspace is, what it should look like, what they're expected to do in that, maintain it free of open and obvious hazards, and really confine what that workspace is. So whenever they're on the way to the kitchen to make a sandwich at lunch, that's not their workspace. They can't you really don't have a colorable argument on what to do. And we also touched on how does the new OSHA regulation, the vaccine mandate, apply to people who work at home? It doesn't, thankfully. It doesn't. If you work 100% at home, you are not required, that employee is not required to test every week, that employee is not required to get vaccinated. If they intend to go into the office, at any point they go into the office, they have to get tested if they're not vaccinated. That's how the ETS is written. So now to the data, kind of the data security, and why should we even monitor it? Well, we want to limit the liability for employee misconduct. And the reason for that is, as we were talking about in the employment panel and the chats and going back and forth, whether it's Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or whatnot, however employees are communicating, Slack channels, Discord, all different types of communication softwares, they want to see, is there harassing behavior going on between a manager and a subordinate? Are they sending those emojis back and forth? Are they sending pornographic images? Are they sending sexually suggestive comments back and forth? And you got it. And how the new Texas law that came out in September plays into this, and employers are going to need to be careful because we don't know how it's going to play out yet, is let's say I'm monitoring communication between my two employees. Well, the new Texas law requires an immediacy, it's an immediacy standard. You have to immediately respond to a reported sexual harassment, whether that just means talking to somebody, setting an interview. We'll figure that out as the case law develops and as these things are litigated. But what happens when somebody in IT and HR sees, okay, this looks shady, this looks harassing. What does HR have to do? I think I would suggest to employers, HR needs to reach out to what appears to be and say, hey, what's going on here? This needs to stop, because HR should also be doing sexual harassment prevention training, and everyone should understand that that's a red light conversation. Oftentimes you see harassment training is red light, green light, or green light, yellow light, red light, in terms of what are safe conversation topics. Obviously, sending pornographic images during work to an employee is a red light. A second reason that people want to monitor and surveil their employees is track productivity. Lee mentioned a goof off app that is very invasive and very strange. That apparently you have to have it takes an image of you every minute or every 10 minutes. And that is a little bit too much Big Brother for me. 1984 called, and they want their policies back. But really tracking productivity, making sure people are working. If you track keystrokes or something like that, there's plenty of software out there and programs out there that can track employee productivity. But really, if you're doing a proper talent management and employee engagement, you're having multiple touch points, and you're not going to have a month where you're not talking to your employee. You should be talking to your employee once a day at a minimum to make sure, if they're all working remotely, to make sure they're engaged and feel like they're part of the team. The third reason is really to protect the employee's brand and trade secrets. You'll see some big companies monitoring social media. I'll tell a personal story. My father worked for Mylan Pharmaceuticals, and they went through quite a tough period, and now it doesn't exist anymore. Well, back during that period, Mylan would monitor their employees' social media, and when they would see one of their employees say something negative about the CEO or say something negative about the organization, they get a call from HR, and that's them protecting their brand. They don't want their employees badmouthing them, rightfully so, on social media. That's not a good look. And of course, your trade secrets. You need to monitor your data and who has access to your data. And finally, just of course, regular malware, phishing attacks, employee safety, and system security. So what laws apply to workplace monitoring and how do you get around them? Well, you just have policies in place. There's a lot of privacy laws across the country that apply that you say you can't monitor, you cannot monitor an employee's communications without them knowing about it. That violates the federal and state wiretapping laws, right? In Texas, it's a one-party communication state. So as long as one party knows that they're recording, it's kosher. Some states are two-party. So what you need to get around that, of course, is a policy in place with your employees that said, hey, by the way, there's no expectation of privacy on your work computer, on your work phone. We can monitor at any time. Sign here. And that's what you need. That's what you need. And of course, your employment discrimination laws apply and the National Labor Relations Act. And it doesn't come up very often. The NLRA doesn't come up super often, so I'm going to touch on it. So the NLRA is basically governs how employees can communicate with one another and about their work conditions at work. And you cannot have a monitoring policy that is going to quash those communications. You are allowed to talk about, I see a lot of these things in employment policies that don't talk about your salary with your employee. Well, that's a no-no. Of course you can talk about your salary. Why can't you? Shouldn't Susie know if she's in the same exact position, in the same exact job as Bob? Shouldn't Susie and Bob be making a pretty close, and they got the same training? Shouldn't they be able to make the same amount of money? Well, yeah. So if you stop them from communicating about that, guess what? You're violating the NLRA. And you also can't have policies that stop union organizing activities. We don't have unions in Texas. We're a right to work state, which is different than an at-will employment state. And if you really want to grind my gears, let's talk about that topic. But so right to work just means that you don't have to pay union dues. In other states, they're compulsory. Whenever you're working at a company that has a union, they're compulsory dues. Right to work just says no, you can't have compulsory dues for a union. So best practices for workplace monitoring. Well, let's make sure there's a real reason why you're doing it, and let's craft that policy towards that reason. It's not just to be big brother. It's not just to be, overbearing and micromanaging. There's going to be a reason for it. Determine how you want to do it and the scope that you're trying to monitor. You're not going to have it. If you monitor everything, you're going to need data overload, right? Your IT needs to have secure monitoring to make sure your systems are secure. Your IT needs to have data to make sure information is not being accessed by people that have no business accessing it. We'll talk about that in a second. That's how you protect your trade secrets, is you silo your information. And you want to balance the need for monitoring this and the culture you're trying to create, right? You don't want everyone to feel like they're being micromanaged. So you have to walk. It's a fine line that you have to walk. So to cybersecurity, and I'm sure Wright can add a whole lot more information than I can on this. But cybersecurity best practices. I mean, it's really just cyber hygiene, technical and process needs. You need a log. Your IT department needs a log of where your hardware and software is. Where is it? Who owns it? When I'm litigating a trade secret case or non-compete or whatever restricted covenant agreement, I want to know, do you have their computer? Because that computer contains, it's a gold mine. It contains all the information that I need to make my case. All of it. is on that computer, because you're that former employee that left you and is trying to steal your business, steal your clients, and do all these bad things to you. Guess what? He likely used your computer to do it. So if you reassign that computer, or you don't know where that computer is, and you don't know what devices have been plugged into that computer, well, guess what? You just made my life a lot harder and your case a lot harder. And it doesn't need to be so. You need to manage your cyber vulnerabilities on an ongoing basis, and that's just basic IT security and software. You need to limit the availability of administrative privileges. So just because you work in IT doesn't mean you can get on and mess with the entire system. You need to secure those to very few people within your organization, more senior folks. And then you need to analyze your IT event logs. So there's software out there that will help you understand what information is being downloaded, what information is being shared, who downloaded it, and how it's downloaded. IT can monitor that remotely, and of course, all that data is maintained on that hard drive with their personal computer. But you need some external service and source for that to make that more manageable. So what technical measures can you put in place? Of course, your firewall, your email, your web browser, anti-malware software. This is an important point, and a lot of companies are starting to do it as the engineering and your STEM type companies that have a lot of proprietary information and trade secret patent information. What they do is they limit whether you can plug USBs into the computer. They limit whether you can print from those computers. And that is a very important and I think smart approach to controlling the data that leaves your system. Because if somebody can't plug a USB drive into that computer, well, they can't really steal the data unless they're emailing it out, right? And that email is easily traceable. You want to make sure you have data recovery capabilities. So that means if somebody's smart, they're going to try to wipe everything whenever they leave. They're going to try to wipe their computer. You need some way to recover that. Again, secure the configuration for network devices, meaning printing, USBs, and the like. And control, and then another important point is controlling who has access to the information. Everybody working in a certain department does not need access to the highest level of information. Have that manager be able to, unless it's of course necessary to perform the job, have that manager be responsible for that high level information. All the entry level employees don't need to know all the deep dark secrets of the company. They don't need to know how it's all put together, right? Have the manager know that, have the supervisors know that, and protect that so the information is not pushed out to people that really, to a secretary who doesn't need to know it, right? So, and then finally, the organizational controls. Have a plan in place in case this does happen. It will, it inevitably does. So have some sort of response plan in place. And then again, work with your employees on what they're expected to do. A lot of large organizations will send out mock phishing attacks, mock phishing emails. I think that's a smart tactic because it always keeps people on guard. They don't know whether it's real, they don't know whether it's fake. And what you'd like to see is a large portion of your employee employee group send it to IT and say, hey, I think this is a phishing attack, or hey, I'm going to report that. That's what you're wanting to see. And all of this is incredibly important as we transition to a work from home online environment. Gen Z, COVID, millennials, we're changing the workplace. It's not going to look, it's not your grandfather's workplace. You don't work there for 30 years and get gold watch. It just doesn't happen anymore. So we need to do as an advisor, as a trusted business partner, is to give you all the tools to protect that data, and then also protect you through policies and through restrictive covenant agreements. And so let's work on that together. And thank you all for your time and attention today. Have a nice day.
All right, Josh, thank you so much. We really do appreciate you coming in and giving us that knowledge. Do we have any quick questions? We've got about 2 seconds. 5, 4.
So what's,
Okay,
what's the,
personal
what's the Redelman review I see up there on the?
Oh, yes, well, the Redelman review is, I tell you, it is yes, the Redelman review is probably the best content on LinkedIn that anybody has ever seen. It's written by yours truly, and I gotta tell you, there's some fire content coming out of that. So if you will follow me on LinkedIn, I do, and I'm saying this in jest, but I do try to provide valuable content for people to follow. We've been posting a lot about OSHA recently. That's been a hot topic, but just tips and tricks for HR managers, for business owners to follow along and to kind of understand things that often come up.
Awesome.
Sure. I'll turn it off.
All right. Oop, don't turn it off. All right. That sounded like that was a loaded question. I really like it. I like how you kind of stage that for me. So no, actually, I'm going to go on there in a little bit. We're going to get lined up on that. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you, Josh.
Thanks, Adam.
And it's about lunchtime, y'all.